it is my pleasure to introduce a senior manager of threat intel research, Justin Moore, for a talk on Get in the Game, analyzing the World Cup as a modern threat landscape. Welcome, Justin.
Hey, thanks so much. Really happy to be here. I want to make sure you can at least see my slides before our kickoff.
Cool. Let me stop the screen share and you should be able to have it. There they are. See them.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, like Brad said, I'm Justin Moore. I am a senior manager of threat intelligence at Unit 42, which is the threat research and incident response arm of Palo Alto Networks. And honestly, I am very excited to be here for season 6 kickoff of the US Cyber Games. So before I jump in case you're wondering who I am, I took a very non-traditional career path to get here. I wasn't an engineer, I didn't code, and cyber was probably the furthest thing from what I thought I'd ever be doing. I started my career supporting Tier 1 special operations units overseas, where in the process, I decided I was going to teach myself computer and cell phone forensics. Moved over to CIA, did technical targeting, some nation-state APT defensive work, and ultimately to running clandestine operations overseas. Was incredibly fortunate to pivot to Mandiant, where I spent almost 8 years, the majority of which was on the advanced practices team, supporting incident response engagements and technical attribution of both APT and cybercrime. Built out the CTI program over at TikTok USDS, and now I'm here at Unit 42, leading fusion intelligence and rapid response. So 2 games are about to happen simultaneously. The one 104 matches, 16 cities, 3 host nations, 48 countries competing, and roughly 6 million people walking through stadium gates between June 11th and July 19th. And half the planet will watch at least some of it on a screen. Now, the other game doesn't have a broadcast deal. It doesn't have a scoreboard that you can see, but it certainly has players, and they're already in position. Now, this last week, I published an analysis of what the 2026 World Cup looks like from the perspective of the people trying to attack it. And I'm here today because the US Cyber Games and that research have something important in common. And I want to show you exactly what that is. Now, here's the thing about major international sporting events. The adversary always shows up. Like Tokyo in 2020, 450 million blocked cyber attacks. Not 450,000, but 450 million, and 0 on-field disruption. Now, those 2 facts only coexist because of years of preparation. 2024 in Paris, 140 confirmed cyber events during the games, 22 successful intrusions, ransomware hits the Grand Palais venue, and roughly 40 other museum partners, and still no competition was disrupted. Now, the pattern is consistent across every mega event for the past decade. The question is never, will the adversaries try? They always try. And the question is whether the defenders are ready. Now, today I want to walk you through what we're facing in 2026, why this year is different from every prior World Cup, and most importantly, why the skills that you're building in CTFs are exactly the skills this environment is going to demand. Now, let me put up the history so you can see the pattern. Rio in 2016, fighting URSA, which most of you probably know as Fancy Bear or APT-28, stole athlete medical records from WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, and published them. There's reputational damage and a chilling effect on athletes participating in testing programs. Pyeongchang 2018. We're going to come back to this one in detail because it's the canonical case study. Qatar 2022. The criminal ecosystem rather than nation states. Over 16,000 fraudulent domains, 40 plus fake mobile apps, 90 fan portal accounts compromised using credential stealing malware sold on Telegram. And then Paris 24. The closest we've come to a full picture because the French cybersecurity agency published a very detailed after-action reports, 140 events, 22 intrusions, and ransomware. Now, the through line across all of these is that no event with serious, sustained preparation had its competition disrupted, and that's not a coincidence. Pyeongchang 2018 is the case study every defender should know because it told adversaries exactly what works. On the night of the opening ceremony, the Wi-Fi in the stadium went dark. The official Olympics app stopped responding, ticketing kiosks froze, broadcast drones were drowned, journalists couldn't file, and athletes' families couldn't print their tickets. 300 plus systems were compromised. It took 12 hours to restore operations, and the cause was Olympic Destroyer, a piece of wiper malware attributed to raising URSA, which is also known by GRU Unit 74455, the same unit behind NotPetya, but designed to look like criminal ransomware to complicate attribution and buy time. Now, here's the detail that matters for defenders. Analysis of the malware samples found that the timestamps on the files targeting the IT service provider were 5 minutes ahead of the files targeting the venue itself. The supplier went first. The supplier is always the threat surface that gets underestimated, and we very well may see that pattern again this year in 2026. Paris is the model, and Paris almost wasn't. France's National Cyber Agency started the security program 2 years before the opening ceremony. Not 6 months, but 2 years. They ran exercises against 500 games-linked facilities. They pre-positioned DDoS scrubbing capacity before the first athlete arrived, and they built a dedicated multi-agency operations center. During the games, DDoS peaked at 190,000 requests per second against the official site. That's roughly 10 times what a typical large organization ever sees in a day, compressed into sustained attack traffic. And it was absorbed. The Grand Palais ransomware attack hit, and it was contained before it spread, and no event was canceled, no athlete was affected. And that outcome was not luck. It was the result of preparation that began long before the torch was lit. And that brings me to 2026, because the threat picture this year is materially different from any prior World Cup. This is the first World Cup where the host nation is in active kinetic conflict with a state-aligned threat actor during the tournament window. On February 28th, the US-Israel-Iran conflict escalated to include direct military action, and that conflict has not yet fully ended, and it's produced a surge in Iran Nexus cyber operations against US organizations that was not present during any previous World Cup. And at the same time, the Russia-Ukraine war continues, and all three host nations, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, are NATO partners or allies. Pro-Russian hacktivist groups have repeatedly demonstrated they will key their operations to politically symbolic events. And the cybercriminal ecosystem targeting the hospitality sector has industrialized since 2023. The Muddled Libra campaign against the hospitality industry showed exactly how that attack chain works at scale. Social engineering the IT help desk, then pivoting through identity providers into virtual infrastructure. 3 threat streams running simultaneously, each one independently dangerous. Together, they create the most complex cyber environment any World Cup has faced. Now, 2 Iran Nexus actors deserve specific attention today. The Handala hack team, assessed by the FBI and multiple commercial intelligence firms to be a front operated by Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Security. They've executed wiper attacks in early 2026, targeted the personal email accounts of senior US government officials, and doxed employees of public companies as part of influence operations. A recent CISA advisory confirms an active, ongoing campaign. This is not historical. Cyber Avengers. This is the IRGC's industrial control system arm. Their documented targeting is specifically focused on internet-exposed programmable logic controllers, or PLCs, in U.S. water, energy, and municipal infrastructure. They look for utilities that still use consumer remote access tools, things like TeamViewer or AnyDesk, that manage operational technology. And CISA and the EPA found that more than 70% of U.S. water utilities are not compliant with existing safety requirements. Now, every World Cup host city in the United States operates municipal water, wastewater, power, and transit infrastructure. And that infrastructure is inside the threat envelope of an active CISA advisory. Now, No Name 05716 is the most operationally consistent pro-Russian hacktivist group since March 2022, and they have attributed more than 3,700 targeted hosts between July of 24 and July of 25 alone. And what makes them particularly relevant for 2026 is 3 things. First, event keying. Their operations have repeatedly surged within 24 to 72 hours surrounding politically symbolic events, NATO summits, peace conferences, major sporting events. The World Cup will certainly qualify. Second, scale without sophistication. Their DDoSia toolkit runs on Windows, Linux, Android, and Docker. Volunteer participants, they get rewarded in cryptocurrency. You don't need sophisticated capability. when you have distributed scale and a volunteer army. And third, OT expansion. A UK National Cybersecurity Center advisory published earlier this year specifically warns that pro-Russian hacktivists have moved beyond DDoS into targeting operational technology via exposed virtual network computing and remote access services. The same OT targeting CERN we have for Iran Nexus actors now applies here too. And despite Operation Eastwood in July of last year that produced 2 arrests and 7 arrest warrants, the group resumed operations within days. Now, financially motivated cybercrime is the highest volume, highest likelihood threat category for the 2026 World Cup. It's also the most likely to affect someone here if you or someone you know is attending. The Qatar 2022 baseline is pretty instructive. 16,000 fraudulent domains targeting fans, 40 plus fake apps in official app stores, and 90 compromised fan portal accounts using Redline and Erbium info stealers distributed through Telegram channels. Now, the Muddled Libra, also known as Scattered Spider campaign, against major hotel operators showed that the hospitality stack is a ransomware target. And the attack chain starts with a phone call to that IT help desk, a convincing voice, a credential reset, and then it's Okta, then ESXi, and then ransomware across the property management system. No phishing emails required. And then there's QR code fraud, which is the fastest growing attack vector for this specific event. 16 cities, 4 time zones, fans constantly moving between venues. In every transit corridor, parking structure, and fan zone becomes a social engineering surface. A fake shuttle QR code is trivially easy to produce and very difficult for a tired fan to verify under time pressure. Now, I'm assuming quite a few of you have done forensic challenges in CTFs before. And here's what those challenges map to in the real world. When you do OSINT to track a threat actor across aliases and infrastructure, that's exactly how we identified that Handala and its affiliated personas were operating out of overlapping C2 infrastructure, even when they presented under completely different front names. When you analyze a malicious QR code in a forensics challenge, you're building the same skill set needed to reverse engineer the fake transit QR fraud targeting fans that are moving between host cities. When you exploit that vulnerable embedded device in a pwn challenge, the underlying technique is the same as what Cyber Avengers is doing against internet-exposed PLCs in American water utilities. When you RE a wiper sample, you're doing Olympic destroyer analysis, credential harvesting, destructive payload, false flag indicators designed to complicate attribution. The CTF is not a simulation of something that might happen someday. It's a compressed version of what's happening right now. Now, the US Cyber Games talks about the concept of the cognitive athlete, the idea that cybersecurity competition develops cognitive skills, the ability to process information fast, make decisions under pressure, and adapt when the situation changes. That framing is exactly right. And here's the reason. The intelligence cycle that drives real threat analysis, it maps directly onto the CTF cycle. You collect, right? You enumerate the target, gather open source data, build your picture of what you're working with. You then process and correlate. You figure out what matters and what's noise. You analyze. You assess the threat actor's techniques, make a call on attribution, determine what they're likely going to do next. You disseminate. You write the brief that a non-technical decision maker can then act on. And finally, you act. You coordinate the response, hand off to the team that closes the gap. In a CTF, the entire life cycle might run in 4 hours. In a real incident, it may run for 4 weeks, but the cognitive structure is identical. The speed is different, the stakes are different, but the underlying skill is the same. Now, let me be direct about what's at stake here. The World Cup requires coordinated defense across 3 nations, 4 time zones, 16 cities, multiple regulatory regimes, and an independent structure that doesn't answer to any of those governments. Now, Paris succeeded because France started preparing 2 years early and built a unified operations center. The US, Canada, and Mexico, they're doing this today, and they have a matter of weeks. The defenders who can operate in that environment, multi-jurisdictional, multilingual, time compressed, technically complex, don't grow on trees. They grow in programs like this one. The people competing in season 6 are the people who will be running World Cup scale operations in 2030 and 2034. That's not hyperbole. The pipeline from CTF competition to senior threat analyst to government partnership is real and documented. And getting in the game isn't a tagline. In cybersecurity, it's the only path to readiness. Now, I want to take 90 seconds and tell you what producing World Cup research actually looked like, because it maps directly onto what a career in threat intelligence looks like day to day. Monitoring threat actor infrastructure, the domains, the C2 servers, the Telegram channels where lures get distributed and proceeds get moved. When World Cup themed phishing lures started appearing in March, we started tracking them. Now, I love to follow geopolitical signals. The escalation of the US Iran conflict in February absolutely changed the threat calculus for this event significantly. That's not something I learned from a database. That's pattern recognition I've built up from years of intelligence experience, tracking everything from Al Qaeda to APTs and ransomware groups. I cross reference government advisories, CISA, FBI, State Department, international partners with commercial threat intel and open source signals. And none of those alone gives you the full picture. The synthesis of all of that is the job. And I write for non-technical audiences. A CISO reading the assessment needs to know what to do on Monday morning. A policy official reading it needs to know what to tell Congress. The analysis is only as valuable as its ability to drive action. That job, in all its forms, starts in CTF competition. Well, let me close with the through line of everything I've just shown you. The actors of greatest concern for this year's World Cup I've mentioned today have all demonstrated their capabilities within the last 24 months in the public record against real targets with real impact. The historical record on mega events tells us exactly one thing: where preparation was serious and sustained, competition was not disrupted. Where it was weaker, adversaries succeeded, no exceptions. Now, the 2026 threat picture is more complex than any prior World Cup. It requires immense preparation, and the defenders who are going to be called on to provide that preparation in 26 and in the cycles that follow are people who built their cognitive muscles in exactly this kind of environment. So here's my ask. Treat the tournament window, June 11th through July 19th, as a live threat intelligence exercise. Watch what happens. Follow the CISA advisories. Track what the hacktivist groups announce. When an incident gets reported, ask yourself, which ring of infrastructure was it? Which threat actor class? What skill would I need to be on the team that's responding to that incident? The match is already underway. Get in the game. Back to you, Brad.
Justin, my gosh, I got some goosebumps over here. You crushed that. 10 out of 10, absolutely phenomenal. Um, from top to bottom, just in terms of all of the reality of what's happening, on the keyboard in the game, whether it's, sitting in your shoes or, somebody that's just approaching their first CTF challenge. That's really the passion, the expertise, the dedication that you've talked about and that you've demonstrated through your talk today is truly impressive. So thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Um, yeah, have a great afternoon.